Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar and question and answer session regarding the new STOP formula grant forms for both the administrators and subgrantees. My name is Tara Wheeler, and I am also accompanied with my colleague Devin Grayson Wallace, and we're going to be going over these materials with you today. Just once again, thank you so much for attending. I know that you guys have had a lot of STOP stuff going on. For instance, all the STOP reports were recently submitted, and then last week was the STOP annual meeting. So we really appreciate you being willing to set aside some time to work with us today and to learn more about the new form. So today we're going to just go over, we're going to briefly go over the overall reporting process and who to contact for assistance. We're going to go over these because we understand that there was actually there's been quite a turnover of STOP administrators, and so we just wanted to kind of go through that process and so that there can be clarity around that. And then after that, we're going to go over the updates to the new STOP administrator form and then the updates to the subgrantee form. If you've ever been on our previous webinars, you've probably noticed that we usually go through the form section by section, question by question. This will not be what's happening today. We're just going to be going over what's new on the form. Also, we encourage you to ask questions as they arise, or you can also hold off on asking questions till the end of the webinar, and we can stay on the line. But chances are, if you have questions about something, somebody else does as well. So we think it's great to just ask questions as they arise, and we'll try to answer them time permitting. I will say that the STOP administrators form is a little bit confusing to me, and same with Devin, because it's a lot of financial information that we don't necessarily have to do. So I'll try to get through that part and those updates. I think I can explain that fairly well, but I might not be the best at it. Okay. So who do you call for help if you have questions when you're filling out these forms? So there's actually a few different resources of who you can call for help, and so we just want to distinguish who to call for what types of help. So if you're having questions about like content of the form, what's being asked of the question, if you're not exactly sure how to interpret the question, those types of calls would come to us. You would call us at VAWA MEI. Also, if you're having any issues with your box accounts and uploading the forms into your box account, those are also questions with us, or likewise, if you aren't able to access Box due to restrictions set on your computers, you can talk to us and we can help you out with that. So we're kind of here, we're kind of the experts on the form itself, and when it comes to STOP administrators, we're in this unique position because you submit the forms directly to us, whereas most grantees who receive OVW funding, they submit the forms directly to OVW using the grants management system. You guys also do use the grants management system. So the subgrantee form is the only form that's submitted directly to us, while the administrator's form, the form that contains all your financial data, that's submitted to GMS. And so if you're having any questions about the grants management system, about like how do you access the form, your administrator's report, how do you upload it back into the system, if you're having problems with your password, you can't find your password, you would be contacting the GMS system, and they have an OVW specific account, both a phone number and email address. So you can contact them, but also they have an account specifically just for password assistance. So if you need any password assistance, you would call the second bulleted OJP GMS line. So GMS is GMS is like the financial system. That's where you're going to be submitting your administrator's reports. And then lastly, if you're having questions about what are allowable activities under the STOP grants, if you have questions about, maybe you're not meeting your sexual assault threshold, or you need assistance with your PREA implementation plan, that's when you would call the Office of Violence Against Women. They're going to be the people that can help you out with that. So here's just kind of an overview of what the reporting cycle is. So remember, there's kind of two different reporting cycles for STOP administrators. There's the reporting cycle where you fill out the administrator's report and submit that report to GMS. And then there's also this reporting cycle of where your subgrantees fill out the subgrantee report and submit those reports to you. So we're going to go over both of those. First is the administrator reporting cycle. So you as the STOP administrator go onto GMS and download the form from GMS. You fill out the form, and then you validate the form by clicking the Validate button on the very last page of your form. And once you've validated the form, you can upload the form into the GMS system. After the form has been uploaded into GMS, it then goes to OVW. So now your OVW program specialist can review your form, and they can approve your form. They might have questions for you, and if they do, you would make the changes they asked for or answer their questions, and then you would resubmit the form via GMS. So once the reports have been submitted and approved all in GMS, the data comes to us at VAWA MEI, and it looks like our PowerPoint did a little bit of resizing, so it just says VAWA, but that's supposed to be VAWA MEI. It happens sometimes when you load PowerPoints into Adobe Connect. There can be like sizing issues. So after your report's been approved, it comes to us at VAWA MEI. We then just make reports off of the financial data. We don't do much with it. It's mostly just data that's included in the biannual report to Congress. And once we're finished just compiling and gathering that data and cleaning it up, we then submit the reports back to OVW. And by reports, I mean like products. We submit the report to Congress back to OVW. So this report right here is due to the grants management system by March 30th of every year. The second report is the SubGrantee Report. Now this is due to us by March 30th of every year. So because of that, you need to, as an administrator, before those reports can come to us, you need to review them and make sure that they're accurate to the best of your ability. And so therefore, you probably need to give maybe 4 weeks to 6 weeks for you to review them. So we know it's not standardized when the reports are due to administrators. Each administrator gets to determine the due dates they set to their subgrantees, but we do know that we get an influx of calls around March 15th and February 15th and March 1st. Those seem to be like the most popular due dates to STOP administrators. So anyway, you set your due date to the subgrantee, and they fill out the reporting form, and they then send that reporting form to you. You as the STOP administrator are going to review that form. You're also going to go through the validation process. It's really helpful at picking up errors and just making sure that that there's no big glaring errors in the data being submitted by the reports. So you're going to review that report, and once you're finished reviewing all of your reports from all your subgrantees, that's when you submit the data to us at VAWA MEI. That data is due to us by March 30th. So we then go through what we call the cleaning process of the subgrantee data. So we analyze it, and we looking for some inconsistencies in the data. So for instance, an inconsistency might be that a grantee reported a victim assistant and then reported law enforcement activities. And we might come back to you and say, hey, there's no law enforcement officer being funded under this grant. So how did they complete these law enforcement activities? And you might answer saying, oops, they forgot to add the law enforcement officer FTEs. Or you might answer as in, actually, they were supposed to just fill out the victim services section, and please delete the information from the law enforcement section. In these cases, we usually send you a Word document that contains all of our questions for it. It's then up to the administrator to reach out to the subgrantees to try to get answers. Maybe you as the administrator already know the answers. Maybe you need to reach out to the subgrantee. But with our staff, it's too hard for us it takes too much of our resources to reach out individually to each subgrantee. So we request that you, the administrators, do that kind of as a bulk. So then once we get the responses regarding the subgrantee data, we then we finish it up and we make reports for you. So for instance, we make state profiles and we also deliver the data back to you, the clean data. And yeah, we make those reports. And then also we make reports for OVW. So before we head on to the Stop Administrators form, are there any questions? Okay. We're actually going to change the view because we're going to put the PowerPoint side by side to the form. Anna, would you mind changing the view? Great. Thank you. So we're going to go through this and go through each of the new parts. The Stop Administrators form didn't change too much. So the first change on this form is question 6C, which is the reallocation of funds returned. So on the previous version of this form, and on this form as well, you fill out you report how much money was awarded to subgrantees during the during the calendar year, and then you also report how much money was returned from subgrantees during the calendar year. And so this question 6C is just reallocating those funds. So it's showing not just, it's more in depth than the previous question about how those funds were reallocated. For instance, you're going to be reporting the number of awards reallocated and the amount, and that's the percentage of the total amount awarded. The percentage of the total amount awarded would be the percentage of that fiscal year's funding. And actually, sorry, I'm incorrect on that. The percentage of the total amount awarded automatically populates. It's actually the amount, it's just the amount divided by the total for the percentage. Oh, we have a question from Renee. State profiles, where is this located? So Renee, we actually, that's a really good question. So for the state profiles, we create, every year we make these state profiles and then we send them out to staff administrators via email. I believe we sent the previous state profiles for the 2017 data cycle out in January or early February. And also contained in that email is Excel sheets that contain all the cleaned subgrantee data.
And so if you did not receive that yet, then likely we have a different contact for your state. So if you want to reach out to me after this webinar, I'll include my email in the chat box, and I can resend it to you because we probably sent it to a former contact.
Thank you, Devin. So question 6C is one of the updates, and then let me scroll down to the next one. Actually, go through here. So there, the next update is regarding question 8A and question 8B, which is the culturally specific victim services awards. This isn't much of an update except for, so it's pretty much the same as it always was, where you're just reporting on the percentage of your funds that were dedicated to culturally specific victim services awards. And the only real update here is in 8B. They're asking that if you're making any awards that are the same award that goes to both your culturally specific organizations and sexual assault funds, it comes from both funding sources, just to discuss that in 8B. Okay. And then the next big question is question 9A and 9B, and this is about your sexual assault awards set aside. And you're just going to be reporting on the types of organizations and the amounts given to those organizations for each federal fiscal year that's under your sexual assault award set aside. And you'll be reporting those numerically in question 9A. And then in question 9B, this is just to discuss challenges with meeting the 20% set aside. So if you're having challenges meeting it, if you weren't able to meet it, you're just going to describe that here in question 9B. And then, so most of the updates were pretty small in the Stop Administrators form, except for when it comes to the narrative question. There are the narrative section, there are quite a few new narrative questions that are being asked, and these questions are required. So now, each reporting period, so each year, you're going to be not just answering the first couple of questions of the narrative section, which have always been required, but there's these additional 5 questions that need to be discussed, or 4 questions, sorry. So, and these are about the new statutory purpose areas that were implemented with VAWA 2013. So if you, any subgrants that were used for incarcerated victims, developing legislation, prevention or education activities, and improving response to victims who have limited access to services due to sexual orientation or gender identity. So if any subgrants that address those purpose areas, you're going to be describing those in question 13. Question 14 is where you're going to be describing any funds being used to support the Jessica Gonzalez Victim Assistance Program. Likewise, question 15 is where you'll describe any funds using for the Crystal Judson Domestic Violence Protocol Program. And then lastly, any funds you're using for the implementation of the Prison Rape Elimination Act or addressing the Prison Rape Elimination Act will be described in question 16. So overall, those are the updates in the Stop Administrator form. That's pretty much it. Are there any questions?
Okay. Oh, I see someone is typing, but in the interim, Anna, could you please switch views to the second form, the subgrantee form? Thank you very much. And I will pause for a moment. Laura Russell asks, I didn't think VAWA had a PREA set aside any longer. And I will pass that back to 2W.
I am not exactly sure if they do have a PREA set aside any longer. I know it's not really a PREA set aside. I think it's a PREA implementation plan. And it's just about how your state is doing on meeting the requirements of PREA. But maybe somebody else on the line or in the webinar today has more information. PREA no longer applies to VAWA. So that question could be no longer necessary. Just read it over, and we're not, unfortunately at VAWA MEI, we concentrate on the forms, and this form, even though it's just been released now, was developed probably 4 years ago.
So a fairly involved and lengthy process to have the forms rebuilt, and our role is more in like stewarding and interpreting it. We don't get to do the actual physical making, and we often don't determine what goes on the form either. That comes directly from OBW. So, yeah. Great question, though. Thank you, Laura, for asking for the clarification. Tony explains that incarcerated persons still fall under underserved populations, and some places do specific work that way under VAWA. Thank you for adding that additional perspective, Tony. Okay, I am going to walk us through the subgrantee form and specifically the updates to the subgrantee form, but can everyone hear me okay? If someone would just type into the chat box and let me know if I'm coming through clearly enough. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Great. Thank you all very much. Okay. So as you all know, Section A1, the first section on the form, is a mandatory section. Uh-oh is right. My network connectivity was just lost. Was yours also?
Yes, mine was lost too, but I'm connected to the internet.
Okay. Well, if everyone can still hear me, I'll keep talking about Section A1. Within Section A1, each question is required. All sub-grantees must complete that subsection, and only one change has been made to Section A1, which is specifically a change to Question 5, which asks for sub-grantee organization type. So this is a question where the sub-grantee must check one answer, the one that best describes the organization receiving the stock program sub-grant. The change that was made to this Question 5 was that the new category of legal services organization was added to the type. If you would bear with me, I am going to try to reconnect.
I'm trying to reconnect too.
Not sure what's going on, but I believe that it's a technical issue within our university where we work out of. Great, thank you for letting me know that you can still hear you. I think my screen has come back. Okay. Is everyone able to see that we're on Section A1 still? Or could anyone let me know if that's what it's showing you, both on the PowerPoint and the form? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chelsea and Katie. Okay, so over here on the right-hand side of the screen where we're looking at the form type of funded organization, as I said, the only change was that the additional category of legal services organization was added. And that is important to keep in mind that that's distinct from a victim services organization. And as we'll talk about later, legal services are specifically services provided by attorneys and paralegals and differ from victim services because they're more specific in nature. Okay, the next section of the form that includes some changes is Section B, purpose areas, and actually quite a few changes were made to the purpose areas, all in order to reflect the changes made by the VAWA reauthorization of 2013. So any of the previously missing purpose areas should now be there, and any tweaks to the framing of a purpose area. So we're not actually going to read through all of those changes because they were really pretty dramatically reworked. And as you'll see, we go from having what I believe was 16 different purpose areas available to now we have 20 purpose areas available on the STOP sub-grantee form. And as you can see, some of them are fairly lengthy and provide a lot of detail about exactly what they're referring to. So we encourage you to carefully review those. The next section that reflects changes on this new form is the training section, C1. Now, likely many of you are already aware of this, but as a reminder, training is specifically intended for professionals or volunteers serving victims in the role of a professional as part of the system. And so sub-grantees should track training separately from the general dissemination of information, as most of you already know. And no change was made to the training events question, but to question 12, people trained, there were two different categories removed, one being military command staff and the other being the multidisciplinary category. So this really emphasizes that sub-grantees should, as much as possible, report professionals within the best fit category because there's no longer the multidisciplinary category that you can just lump a large group of various professionals into. So we encourage sub-grantees to find the best fit, even if it's not an exact fit. That's a great question, Tony. Tony asked, does military command staff now just come under government agency staff?
I would say yeah. I'm not exactly sure why that this was removed from the form, but I would think that government agency staff would be the best way to describe that. And also, if sub-grantees are, they're not sure where to put that, it's always okay to put it in other. you know,
We just ask that, as always, whenever subgrantees are using the other category, that they spell out how many belong to each category if there are multiple different groups in other. So if a subgrantee wrote military command staff and also wrote, fire personnel, we ask that they, and then have a total of 20, we ask that they put in parentheses next to both of those categories how many came from each. So, for example, military command staff, parentheses 10, comma, fire personnel, parentheses 10, with a total of 20 in the quantitative box in the people trained other category. Thank you for that question, Tony. And then the one other change made to the training section was that there were some additional training content areas added. So within the justice system, as you can see, if you have not yet looked at this subgrantee form, although I expect most, if not all of you have, they're broken out by different types of focuses of content areas. So within the focus area of justice system, the category content area of domestic violence committed by law enforcement personnel was added, homicide prevention was added, and sexual assault evidence collection kits were added. So you should be able to see those up here. There's 2 of them, and then sexual assault evidence collection kits is at the top of the second column. And then within the underserved category, the content area of are deaf or hard of hearing and are in correctional settings were added. And then an entirely new section was added for education. Now, education is a dissemination of general information that will increase public awareness of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking. In this way, it is completely distinct from training because it is not geared to professionals. It is geared toward the general public. So anytime a subgrantee is, conducting events, say like attending a fair or, tabling at a public event, that's an education event because it's geared toward the general dissemination of information. It is not an event specifically for professionals and for helping professionals to better respond to victims. So now all the subgrantees can count that, yes. Glad that Tony is excited. We here are very excited as well to be able to offer this. So question 15 is where subgrantees would report the total education events provided with STOP funding. And events are counted by audience, just like training events. So a separate audience is a new event. So if a subgrantee tables at a day-long fair and they're there all day, that's one event, even as, doing a drop-in to a, business cluster for just half an hour is also one event because those are 2 distinct audiences. Question 16 asks subgrantees to check all that apply among the groups educated. So they're just general types of groups of members of the public. As you can see here, it's things like middle and high school students, victim survivors. And then question 17 asks for subgrantees to report the topics of the education events provided with STOP program funding. And so similar to training, they're broken out within different types of broad content areas, and they have specific checkboxes, and subgrantees should check all that apply. Before I move into policies, does anyone have any questions about this new education section or about the changes made to training or purpose areas or type of organization, any of the updates we've gone over so far? Okay, well, if anyone thinks of a question, feel free to type it into the chat box, and I will turn my attention to it as soon as I see it. The next section that has been updated on this form is section C4, Policies and Legislation. So within question 20, there are quite a few new categories added that subgrantees can now check off as having developed, substantially revised, or implemented during the current reporting period with STOP subgrant funding. So within victim services, okay, let me back up. So as you'll see on the PowerPoint, there are 4 new types of policies available to be chosen, but many or all of them actually are duplicated within at least 2 different overall categories. So for example, sexual assault evidence collection kits is a new content area, topic area available under victim services, law enforcement, and prosecution. The homicide prevention is a new policy area available under law enforcement and victim services. So there's a number of new options within policies and legislation. And then there's a completely new question, question 21, which asks for subgrantees to describe activities related to the development or promotion of state, local, or tribal legislation and policies. So this is a new narrative question, and this is it's separate from an optional additional information question. It's much more specific, and we encourage subgrantees to fill it out if they are filling out the policies and legislation section of the Stop Subgrantee form.
Well, so we encourage, so if you have subgrantees who are using funds for to support the development or promotion of state, local, and tribal legislation and policies, which is just a very long way to say lobbying, this is the only place they can report those activities is this question 21. So if they're doing that, which is a new purpose area that prior to VAWA 2013 was never allowed to be addressed with VAWA funding, we just want to make sure that they're describing those activities here because this is the first time anyone's really going to be able to report them.
Thank you for that clarification, Tara. Okay. The next section with updates is section C5, products. So the major change made to the product section is that the product section is no longer offering subgrantees the space to report on the number of products used or distributed. So if STOP grant funding only supports distributing and using a product, the subgrantee should not report it in the product section. So the product section is now exclusively for reporting products that were developed or revised during the current reporting period using subgrant funds. So there are fewer columns in this question now, and whether a subgrantee should be even checking yes or not has become more refined. Does anyone have any questions about either policies and legislation or products? Okay, I'm going to keep going. But again, if you think of a question, feel free to type it into the chat box. Okay, within section C6, data collection and communication systems, questions 24 and 25. Thanks, Tara. Question 24 remains the same. You simply check, the subgrantee would check all categories that apply if they use STOP grant funding to develop, install, or expand data collection or communication systems. That change to data collection was made to question 25, where a new purpose of the data collection or communication systems was added, and that new purpose is sexual assault evidence collection kits. All right. Section C8 says, so no changes were made to specialized units. And then the next section, C8, system improvement. As a reminder, this section is meant to record improvements made that influence a broad system-wide response. And there were 2 different categories added to question 28, one of which is fatality review and the other is language access plan. So separate from translation, that is specifically a more broad category for helping victims or those moving through the criminal justice system access services in their own language. Okay. This brings us to Section D, victim, hit that too many times. This brings us to Section D, victim services, where there are more changes that were made to really try to capture a more robust picture of how subgrantees are using their funding and how STOP funds are serving communities. So as a reminder, Most of the data requested in the Victim Services section is congressionally mandated. Specifically, Congress wants to know how many of the victim survivors seeking services were served and how many could not be served. It's very important that subgrantees are only reporting in this section on victims and survivors served and services provided with STOP program funding, not anything that they are doing with other funding. Okay, so the Victim Services section spans from question 29 to question 37, and then there is a whole new section within Victim Services, which is the Legal Services section. And we will walk through that more specifically, but it's important to keep in mind that subgrantees should not be filling out the Legal Services section unless they have filled out the preliminary questions in the Victim Services section, specifically the number of victims served, not served, partially served, the demographics, all of those required Victim Services questions. Okay, so within Section D, subgrantees should be reporting all subgrant-funded victim services provided, whether by a victim legal services organization or by staff providing victim services within law enforcement, prosecution, or the court. And if you have any questions about that, we're happy to answer questions now, but if you would like a more comprehensive explanation or you need a refresher, we're happy to do TA after this webinar, and there's lots of resources on our website. Okay, so question 29 is the general how many victims were served, partially served, or not served. And then we have the new question immediately following that, question 30, which is how many victims and survivors served during the current reporting period were new. So specifically, within each victim survivor reported in 29A and 29B as either being served or partially served with STOP program funded services, how many just began receiving STOP funded services during the current reporting period. So if it is a subgrantee's first reporting period using STOP funds, all victim survivors that they report in 29A and B should be reported in question 30. And just the way the victim served is broken out in 29, in question 30, subgrantees should be reporting victims according to their presenting victimization. In question 31, also a brand new question, subgrantees now have the opportunity to separately capture all additional victimizations for every victim survivor that they report as served in question 29A and 29B. So subgrantees should be reporting a victim only once under each additional victimization, but they can report them in whichever category they want in addition to the presenting victimization. So if a subgrantee reports 10 victim survivors of sexual assault served in question 29, then in question 31, this very first box, sexual assault, presenting victim survivors of sexual assault, should reflect that 10. And then if they want to report additional victimizations for half of them under domestic violence, dating violence, they would put 5 in that next column under additional victimizations, domestic violence, dating violence, on that same row for presenting victim survivors of sexual assault. So this is a great new opportunity to really provide a more robust picture of the victimizations that many people who are receiving STOP grant funded services might have in addition to those captured in the primary victimization question. So I see we had a question that I missed, 2 questions that I missed. So I'll start with Tony's question because it's about products, which is further back, and there is not somewhere else to list products distributed on the form. Sorry for that. So there's not another question where subgrantees can list products distributed even if they were funded with STOP grant funding, but that's always something that subgrantees can put in the narrative.
Yeah, and I just want to elaborate a little bit on that. So basically the subgrantee should only be reporting products during the reporting period in which the product was developed or substantially revised. and that's it. So that's kind of why this change happened, was because before it was like put the products in even when they were for reporting periods in which they were distributed, and that no longer applies.
Thank you, Tara. And then I see we have another question from Jaquetta. Can you clarify the new victims during the reporting period? So basically, if it is the first time a victim survivor is coming to receive STOP grant-funded services, they would count as new. So for example, if one victim services organization had a STOP-funded grant in 2017 and in 2018, and then in 2018 they are serving some of the same people that they served with STOP grant funding the previous year, they would not count them as new. Oh, great. I'm glad that you were able to figure that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll just add a little bit of context to this question. This question allows us to get an unduplicated count of victims served. So because counts of victims served can be duplicated across reporting periods, all we can ever report to Congress is the average. And so this question right here was added so that we could no longer just have to report the average, but we could report the total unduplicated count.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the question. Okay. So as I said, question 31 is an opportunity for subgrantees to report all of the victimizations experienced by the people they are serving. Oh, too far. Question?
And pay attention to that trafficking piece. That's actually a really important, so even though trafficking isn't like a direct purpose area to address funds on this form, OVW is very interested in, and what's happening with trafficking victims and how many trafficking victims are being served. So if so even though a lot of times trafficking victims can be classified under sexual assault or domestic violence, please report if they are trafficking victims, because this actually is very instrumental in helping OVW understand the scope of trafficking, but also is very instrumental in being able to identify where, if resources should be dedicated or what resources should be dedicated to trafficking.
Thank you, Tara. Okay. So the next change was made to question 33, reasons not served / partially served. So if you've seen these forms before, you will recall that this question used to be a single list of checkboxes that applied to both victims not served and victims partially served. And now there are two separate columns of checkboxes available. One column specifically for reasons victims were partially served, and another column specifically for reasons why victims were not served. So subgrantees should indicate whether each reason checked applies to victim survivors partially served, not served, or both. So this is one of the changes that I find very exciting, because when we're looking at the data, it really helps us interpret the numbers reported in question 29, victims served and not served, for clarity and understanding. So hopefully subgrantees will be as excited about this change as I am. Okay. In the demographics questions, there have been a handful of updates. In question 34, within the race and ethnicity demographic section of question 34, there is a new category available which reads some other race, ethnicity, or origin. So that's an entirely new category, and it is distinct from the other categories listed. And as a general reminder, victim survivors can be reported in more than one race ethnicity. So the total race ethnicity should not be less than the sum of 29A and 29B, total victims served and partially served, but it can be more than that total because the same person can be counted within multiple categories. Within gender, the new category of transgender or gender nonconforming has been added. And unlike race, gender needs to be equal to the sum of 29A and 29B. Yes, this is another very exciting addition. One of the most exciting, I think. Certainly one of the ones that we got the most questions about over the years with increasing frequency. Within the age section, the category that formerly read 13 to 17 now reads 11 to 17. So the youngest age of primary victim that subgrantees can report as having served with STOP subgrant funds is 11. And this change was made specifically to bring the form in alignment with the changes made by VAWA 2013. And just like gender, the total age must equal the sum of 29A and 29B. It cannot be less than or more than. But there is that unknown category that subgrantees can use if they don't have an age category to place a victim survivor into. In question 34, other demographics, there are 3 new categories. One is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer individuals. One is people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and the third is people who are in correctional settings. So as a reminder, the other demographics category should not be the types of things that are required questions for intake. They should only be reported on if a subgrantee learns of victim survivors' other demographic statuses in the course of providing them services. So Chelsea asks, for people who are in correctional settings, does this mean the victimization happened in a correctional setting, or does it mean that the person is currently in a correctional setting?
The latter, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to double check with Tara, but the answer is the latter. So the question is asking if the people being served are currently in a correctional setting. And my understanding is that the victimization could have taken place in the correctional setting or potentially could have taken place beforehand, and it's just now that they're in the correctional setting that they're receiving services.
Mm-hmm.
Tara is nodding, so I got that correct.
Absolutely. And correctional setting, just for you guys listening, correctional setting includes any type of court-mandated rehabilitation program, any type of halfway houses. Those can be included in correctional settings.
Thank you, Tara. And that's a question we actually recently got, so
yes,
very timely for that clarification. Thank you. Okay, the next change was made to 36A victim services. So this is a very different way of asking, or is an entirely different type of information being asked for now in question 36A. So for victim survivors reported in 29A and 29B, subgrantees should be reporting the number that received each type of service offered in the first column in 36A. So that part is the same. It should be the total number of people served who received each type of service with STOP grant funds. And then the second column is where subgrantees can now report the number of times that service was provided. And that number of times service was provided should be a total, not a per person count. So for example, if 10 victims each received counseling 3 times during the current reporting period, then the number of times service was provided reported should be 30. Let me know if anyone has any questions about that or really anything else we've gone over so far. You can type into the chat box. And that is a new opportunity all the way down for subgrantees to record and report on really how robust the services they're providing are and what that looks like in terms of their time and energy and the support they can offer victim survivors. And one other update to question 36A, victim services, is that the category civil legal assistance has been entirely removed. And that is because anything that was formerly reported as civil legal assistance, which, as a reminder, is specifically only legal services provided by attorneys or paralegals, should now be reported in the legal services section where subgrantees can now really get much more detailed about what services they're providing instead of just lumping it into the general category of civil legal assistance. So Tony asks, for legal advocacy, how is that counted? So legal advocacy, I'm guessing what you are thinking of is more like legal services, and we have a whole new section for that, unless you are asking about civil legal advocacy and court accompaniment. that first category, but I'm thinking you mean legal services, and we have a whole section on that Tara will walk us through, but that is, again, legal services is only provided by attorneys and paralegals, and it's true, robust, in-depth legal services.
Yeah, the big difference between legal advocacy and legal assistance is that attorney paralegal STEs. And that's pretty much the only difference. Every time you notify a victim of a court hearing, absolutely, that can be considered legal advocacy. It depends on how you guys would count that. It could just be victim witness notification, but that can be considered civil legal advocacy or criminal justice advocacy. And, I think that's up to the subgrantees to determine whether they think it really should be counted as a service or a notification.
Thank you for providing that additional clarification, both of you, Tony and Tara. Thank you. Does that answer your question? Basically, the takeaway is it could, yes, similar to the tracking. Okay, yep, great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's very similar to VOCA because a lot of times it's the notifications about someone's rights under VOCA. So I would agree that it's very similar to VOCA.
Thank you. Okay, so the questions about shelter services and hotline calls have not changed. My computer, oh, no, okay, sorry, technical difficulties. Computer was being slow, but it is not entirely frozen. Okay, in question 37, protection orders, this is a reminder that the total number of temporary and/or final protection orders requested and granted during the current reporting period should be reported in question 37. Protection orders should only be reported here if STOP program-funded victim services staff provided assistance to victim survivors in obtaining those protection orders. I think this update has a typo in it. If an attorney or paralegal assisted victims in obtaining protection orders, you would not report those protection orders in victim services because you would actually be reporting that legal assistance in the legal services section.
That's exactly right.
My apologies for this typo. So the whole update here for protection orders is that if an attorney or paralegal is the one providing assistance with that protection order, track that as a legal issue and report it the way you would report other legal issues and legal outcomes in the legal services subsection, which Tara will now walk us through. And so if you have any questions at any point, feel free to type them into the chat box.
Okay, thank you, Devin. And I am now attached as a presenter to the webinar. That was totally weird getting kicked off. Something blipped within our university. I even got kicked off my VPN, and so sorry about that. Okay, so yes, now there is a new legal services subsection. This section was added because, now STOP subgrantees can use more of their funds to direct specifically to providing victim survivors with legal assistance. So a big thing to remember here is legal services are only provided by a grant-funded attorney or paralegal. If there's pro bono attorneys and paralegals working on, STOP-funded cases, we would expect that there would be someone on staff who's at least supervising them. And then you'd want to also make sure your subgrantees describe that in the narrative. But, just please pay attention to when subgrantees fill this out and just make sure that it's actually something that's funded under their grants before, submitting it to us. And just a helpful hint, as you're reviewing these reports, let's say that, a subgrantee said yes to a section and that that actually no funds didn't go to that and they, they're confusing it with something else. You can just select no, and that will remove everything from the section. So it's an easy way to delete all information from a section. So if, they're using grant funds for attorney or paralegals and they're providing services to victims, they would be reporting in this section. A big thing to note is that this is like a subsection of victim services. So let's say that they served 100 victims during the current reporting period, and 90 of them received legal services. We would expect to see that 100 victims served and partially served in question 29. In question 29, A and B. We would expect the demographics to be reported in the demographics questions, the relationships to be reported, and those questions and those pieces. Tony, I'll get to that question in just a second. So we're going to just go over what this question is. So this is legal issues, and these are going to be the number of victims who received assistance with each type of legal issues. And this isn't the number of times, just the number of victims. So for instance, if 30 victims received assistance with obtaining temporary and final protection orders, you would still only report 30 here. It's important to note that B and G, so B, family laws, and G, immigration matters, those right there, the top is an unduplicated count. It seems very finicky to me, but unfortunately that's the way it is. So let's say that you've helped a total of 15 families with family law matters. You would put 15 right here, and then you might have like, you helped out with 10 victims with divorces, 7 with custody visitation, so it's an unduplicated count. And it's just reporting any legal issues addressed. Now, Tony, with the SAS formula grant, is this going to be changed in the same way? So I haven't really looked at the new statutes regarding what changes were made with SAS, but I don't believe so, because I don't, the reason this change was made was because VAWA 2013 increased the type of legal services and legal assistance that could be provided to victim survivors. And so if SAS also increased that, then this may be added, but I'm not sure at this time. No problem. So question 39, so this is the number of victim survivors who received assistance with legal issues. So like I said before, if you served 100 victims over the reporting period, or if a subgrantee did, and 90 of them received assistance with legal issues, you would be reporting 90 in question 39. And then question 40 is about victim survivors who received assistance with multiple legal issues. So for instance, if you assisted victim survivors with 35, you assisted 35 victim survivors with both protection orders and family law cases, you would report 35 in that in question 40. And the last question of the last legal services question is legal outcomes. And this is where you report any and all outcomes. So, if you're providing assistance with both temporary and final protection orders, you can report all those protection orders here. So if you, if a court decided to grant both a temporary and final protection order for a victim you helped out with and helped them attain this protection order, you would put 2 court decisions happen within the current reporting period. So this doesn't have to be an unduplicated count of victim survivors. It's just supposed to be a count of all the outcomes that happened during the reporting period. Great. Oh, and then I never flipped forward on the PowerPoints. So there's the write-ups of the PowerPoints for the outcomes of the outcomes. So now we're actually going to we're in the end of, we're coming to close to the end of this webinar, because now we're getting to the criminal justice section, and there really weren't many changes that would impact your subgrantees. And a lot of these are so minute that I didn't even write up a slide on them, because they are just very minute. So one of the changes is previously under law enforcement activities, they're used to have this category that said referred to federal prosecutors for firearm charges. And it was just specific to referring to the federal prosecutors because there was a somebody had a firearm when they weren't supposed to. Now it's just referred to federal prosecution. It doesn't have to have that contingency of a firearm on it. That was really the only update in the law enforcement section. Within the prosecution section, there really have been no updates, except for we now have totals. So now we know how many, the total dispositions of cases during the current reporting period. That's about it. I'd say probably the biggest update is in courts, and there used to be this question here that said number of new criminal cases, and it was just where like the courts documented how many new criminal cases came to it during the reporting period, and that's no longer collected. It's just, you don't need to collect that at all. It's because that, you know, the data was never used, anything like that. So there's one place where we got rid of a question. So, and then this question 56 was updated for dispositions of violations, and this question also appears in the probation and parole section and has the same update. So previously, you would there was 2 columns here, and subgrantees would report the number of partial revocations and the number of full revocations. Those 2 columns were combined into one, so now it's just the number of partial or full revocations of probation as the disposition of a violation. And those were the only updates for the court section. Under probation and parole, there were a couple of updates. The first one is it used to be that for subgrantees using funds for probation and parole, they would be reporting the number of new offenders being monitored and the number of continuing offenders being monitored for the reporting period. Now it's just the number of offenders. You know, when we looked at how we used that data, we saw that like, oh, we actually never report on it separately, so it just got combined into the number of offenders. Another exciting update is that electronic monitoring is now a monitoring activity. So GPS, radio frequencies, those can now be counted in the monitoring activities question. And like I mentioned before, with the dispositions of violations, now we combined 2 columns into one for partial or full revocation of probation. There's one more update when it comes to actual like reporting of data and not narrative, but so we used to ask how many of new offenders and continuing offenders were in the BIP program. Now it's just the number of offenders in the BIP program. So. And then there's just one new additional narrative question, and this is only for subgrantees using funds for the Crystal Judson Domestic Violence Protocol Program. So if you know a subrantee is using funds for this program, just make sure they fill out question 71, which is just to describe how the funds were used and what's been going on with the implementation of the Crystal Judson DV protocol during the current reporting period. And those are all the updates. Are there any questions?
We left some time at the end to take any and all questions about these updates or the changes, or if anything didn't make sense, you would like some clarification. So feel free to type into the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on that and take them as we get them.
Yeah, and if you don't have any questions, feel free to log off. Can you email the PowerPoint or a document summarizing all of this? Anna, is that in the pod? Yes. Okay, so in this files pod, you can see the handouts, and this is the summary, and this is the PowerPoint that's a summary of the handouts. And that's a great question about, like, what are we going to be offering to subgrantees? So within the next couple of weeks, we will be recording webinars, and we're going to record one webinar that's for stop administrators, and it's going to go over the administrator's form, but also how to review your subgrantee reports. And then we're also going to record a different webinar that's for subgrantees, to watch on how to complete the subgrantee reports. When those are done and on our website, we will work with also on contacting all administrators to notify them that this is coming out and this is out and available. And Karen asked, when do these reports take effect? These reports take effect next year. Thank you, Devin, for answering that. So next year you'll be using these. Also, there is a we recorded today's webinar, and we will be posting this on our website.
And I mistakenly said that we would be doing that within the next couple weeks, but it's actually probably significantly sooner than that. It'll probably be in the next couple days or by the beginning of next week at the earliest. I checked in with our TA point person.
Oh,
so you can keep an eye out for that recording coming early next week, the latest. You can download, to repeat what Tara said, the PowerPoint we went over right here in the bottom right-hand corner from the files pod.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any follow-up questions, you can always reach out to us directly. I'll put my phone and my email into the pod.
And Katie asks, do you mean next calendar year? Yes. So Katie, next March, or next February, March, that's when you'll be submitting the new administrators form via GMS, and that's when you'll be submitting the new subgrantees forms to us. We very carefully timed this, that we're like, okay, all subgrantee reports have been submitted to us because we didn't want to get too confused with which form. Oh, thank you very much, Robert. And the transcript will be available. We post the transcript on our website, right? Yes, Robert, the transcript will be available on our website. And yes, our website does have all the forms on it, and it does have the handout on it too, right?
I think so. We can definitely add it if it's not.
Yeah, and it will definitely be added with the recording.
Yeah. So if you go to, I'm going to put a link right into the chat box for.
Oh, another Tara's on the call, and Tara said the handout is on the website. Thank you. The handouts are so helpful. It's just a universal standard.
Thank you for that, Tara. And the handout is available right at that link, as is the reporting form as an example and the instructions for both subgrantee and administrator. Wow. Three.
That's me.
Yeah. Took me a minute to.
I don't know how this name got so popular, but it really did. All right, so we're just waiting. We're going to stay on the line, and, if you guys keep having questions, pop them up, and if not, feel free to log off. But we'll be here for a while more. Catherine asks, this PowerPoint you are using in the pod, the one I have from the emails, is only 20 slides. Oh, it's only 20 slides because it's like 2 to a page, right? It's like 2 or 3 to a page.
Yeah, it should be in like handout view where they squish them together, but maybe
Here, I'm going to download it and check it out. Yeah, it's got all the, it does have all the slides included. It's just 2 to a page.
Okay, we have another question about submission.
You're welcome.
We helped submit the old-fashioned way via mail and CD, but unfortunately my state office does not allow for the use of box, Dropbox, and other similar. Yeah. So those are our only 2 methods really right now. It's just either snail mail or box. And you're not alone in being you're not the only state office that doesn't allow use of box.
Yeah, and we are trying to see if there's availability through like a private way we can set up through our own website. But, and Jaquetta, you are not way behind the times. Actually, your IT is probably ahead of the times because they don't want, we find that states that can't use box, it's because IT doesn't want state employees accessing file sharing services. And there's plenty of states that this happens to. But we are trying to see with our website if there's a way to add file sharing functionality to it, because it would be more open to, you know, it would just be more accessible to everybody. And if we do end up making that update, we would definitely give administrators advance notice. But we don't mind accepting files through snail mail, except for none of us have CD drives. We have to go seek out CD drives. But that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll figure something out that might operate a little more smoothly in the future. Probably not as soon as next year, but we are working on it and looking into it. So thank you for bearing with us in the interim.
Yep. And always know that we're willing to work with anybody on their data submission. For instance, I've had states email me in like 10 different emails their reports because it was like it wasn't going to happen any other way. Oh, that's good information, Christine. So yes, you can talk to IT to see if they can unblock it and allow it. Yep.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and as Tara said, we'll stay on the line for any other questions. Yeah, thank you, Jaquetta, for participating and for being willing to snail mail us your data. As Tara said, we're flexible and we're willing to do whatever needs to happen to help get that data from you, but you know, we appreciate the effort that you and all other administrators make in submitting it to us. You're welcome, Tony. Thanks for all the great questions.
Yeah, and here's our general contact information. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to answer them if we can. Hopefully we can.
I just remembered I said I would put my phone number in, and I got distracted. So that's my direct line at my desk also.